Panie Przewodniczący!
Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We resume our sitting, the sitting of the European Parliament. The minutes of yesterday's meeting and the adopted texts are available already.
Otrzymałem od Rady
I have received the statement of the Council in the first reading, the regulation regarding the normalization of the accounts of railway undertakings, the regulation concerning the opening of the market for domestic passenger transport services by rail, the regulation establishing specific conditions for fishing in the North East Atlantic, the directive concerning the opening of the market for domestic passenger transport services by rail, and the governance of the railway infrastructure. The titles will be listed in the minutes of this sitting. The 3-month period available to Parliament to adopt its position will therefore begin to run from tomorrow, the 28th of October 2016.
A teraz przechodzimy.
And now we start our work. Commission statement, switch between summer and winter time. The first speaker will be our friend, the Commissioner, Mr. Navracsics, whom I welcome very warmly. The floor is yours.
President, honourable members, on Sunday, 30th of October 2016, the Union will switch back to winter time in a harmonised manner as required under the Directive 84 of 2000. Allow me to recall the background of the summer and winter time arrangements and the reason why these arrangements exist. Summertime was introduced by most member states in the 70s as a response to the energy crisis. Also, governments wanted to provide people with more leisure opportunities by making the most of daylight time. With the emergence of the internal market and as member states began to apply different summertime start and end dates, it became clear that a harmonised approach for summertime arrangements in the EU was essential. Transport, in particular, would be among the many direct beneficiaries, since such a harmonised approach would ensure smooth transport operations and coordinated timetables for cross-border and international transport. Therefore, it was decided to harmonise the dates of the application of summertime in the EU in a directive in 1980. The latest directive, adopted in 2001, imposed the application of summertime for an indefinite time. We are aware of different studies from various external sources. So far, there are no conclusive arguments to be gained from them. This concerns any possible effects either way, whether they relate to people's health, energy savings, agriculture or transport. In 2014, the Commission carried out a study to look closely at the potential effects of not having harmonised summertime in the EU in the context of the internal market. The study examined the effects of member states applying different summertime arrangements. The study includes scenarios of abolishing summertime in one or more member states. It did not look into the savings or costs that would result from abolishing the harmonised approach to summertime for the European Union as a whole. Based on the evidence from some of these studies, however, we are convinced that a shift away from a harmonised approach has the potential to inconvenience a large number of people, most visible in the transport and communications sectors. Recently, the Commission received a letter from 7 of the honourable members of this Parliament. Those honourable members asked the Commission to evaluate the functioning of the Summertime Directive and to consider abolishing it. The Commission replied that it intends to examine the issue more closely and will analyse the impact of current arrangements in Member States based on available evidence. Work has already started on this analysis. It would be premature to go into further detail at this stage, but it would be interesting to hear specific views and evidence from the Parliament. Thank you.
Köszönöm. Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner. Now we have time for speeches of representative political groups. First of all, on behalf of EPP, Deputy Herbert Royal, 3 minutes, take the floor, please.
President,
dear colleagues, Mr. Commissioner, I'm really sorry. There is no simple response to any of the questions we raised. I don't think that's fair. We've been doing this for months. We've been doing this for a long time, and we keep raising the questions and we don't get answers. What you just said, of course, I know you're not the commissioner responsible for that, so you don't bear the responsibility for this particular dossier, but the answers are always the same. We want to have a harmonized procedure. I don't know anyone who doesn't want to have a harmonized procedure. Of course, we want to have this harmonized procedure in all member states. No one is debating that. But we want someone to look at this situation, that moving these times twice a year, that this has advantages or disadvantages. And there's a number of studies which provide evidence showing that this is damaging. And perhaps if our studies are false, then you have to provide your own studies. We've been looking at studies on sleep, on transport, we know that making this change twice a year has a negative impact on human health. So I know there are many people have feeling a negative effect. So there's no reason to do this twice a year. And I don't see any advantage to doing this. And at that time, it was introduced because everyone thought we were going to save energy. But now we've seen we're not saving any energy. It's completely clear. So if you're going to save energy, then if you're not going to save any energy, why do you have to do this to people twice a year? It costs money. It has a negative health impact. So I think the Commission should be taking its responsibility, because if you have any situation where there's ever a suspicion that there's a negative impact on human health, then the Commission always takes action. And in Germany we have a thorough study. In the Czech Republic there are a number of national parliaments where people are concerned with this issue. There are large number of petitions being received that we want someone to respond to this concern. And since it doesn't really give us any benefit, only damages, at least for a large number of people, then of course you have to draw the conclusion that, well, why don't we just not do this? We're not expecting you that you carry out some kind of heroic deed. Rather, we just feel that you should go back to the normal situation and stop changing these times, unless you provide evidence that it doesn't have any damaging effect and there's no disadvantage to doing this. But otherwise, we're always getting the same answer. You're always saying you don't want to damage the single market, you want to have harmonized conditions in the member states. But of course, that's what we want as well. We're going to abolish this in all member states at once. Please take this seriously.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Royal. Now, on behalf of SND, Signora Diputada Ines Ayala Sender. 15 minutes. 15 minutes.
Sí, gracias, presidente. Sí.
Thank you very much, President. The services tell me that it's a record. I hope my colleagues will forgive me, because I wasn't actually asking for that much time. I mean, I would have preferred a bit more speaking time yesterday when we had the report on the accounts. But I hope I'm not going to bore you. I mean, and I apologise that I'm going to speak at a bit of length. Now, it's true that during the early hours of next Sunday, we will see a change that we apparently won't notice because we'll be asleep while it happens, but we will note it during the subsequent week in a significant fashion. The change in the clocks will produce a accumulation of tiredness because of a lack of sleep, and that will affect the health of our citizens. I mean, there has been information provided, qualitative and quantitative effects. There is a certain percentage of health problems that accumulate over the weeks and months following the change in the clocks. And there's also been an effect on other things. I mean, we looked at this when Directive 2084 was implemented, and there's an increase in traffic accidents, and you could even see that there was a peak in terms of road traffic accidents just 1 month after the change in clocks, because there was a chronic accumulation of stress due to a lack of sleep, which meant that exactly a month after the change in clocks there were more problems when it came to traffic. Now in Spain there is a further feature. During the 40s, during the Franco dictatorship, Spain in 1942 adopted German time and actually never changed it subsequently. Spain should actually be using Greenwich Mean Time, but it never has been since 1942, so that means that following the adoption of the European directive, every time the clocks change there are significant discussions. It's true that recently there's been a decision in the Parliament of the Balearic Islands. There have been discussions in the community of Valencia. These are regions, areas which essentially live off tourism, so services, and they're very seasonal services, and that relates a great deal to the hours of sunshine there is. In addition, the hotel industry in the Mediterranean in Spain has got involved. They have suggested that during the week following the change to winter time, around 7% of hotel room occupancy is lost because there are fewer hours of sunshine during the afternoon. So there is a significant effect in terms of the economy, industry, and also on people's health. And there's also an effect on road traffic safety, as I've mentioned, and I think that's significant. I think in 2014 the Commissioner did commission a study. The study suggested leaving things as they are, but I think that given the demographic situation in the European Union, which are causing chronic stress due to a lack of sleep, stress at work, etc. People are getting more and more vulnerable, and given that, I think that this health aspect is becoming more significant. So changing the clocks twice a year, social jet lag twice a year, I think generates significant effects on people's health. And you can see that in any study that you care to mention, as we heard in last year's hearing. In the European Union, we're not particularly popular, and therefore we shouldn't be producing added stress to people. So I think it's important for the Commission, as it's done in other areas, not only to carry out a study as to how this affects people in all kinds of different ways, but also should analyse the effect of the opposite, i.e. if we didn't change the clocks twice a year, i.e. people could maintain their biological body clock intact, as it were. And here I don't think the Commission has given us enough figures with regard to the cross-border effect as well. I mean, at the time I was in the Parliament working with my group. I wasn't a member at the time when the directive came into force, and so safety effects, health effects, security effects, but we hear that harmonisation is a good thing, and we heard that harmonisation would have a significant effect on cross-border matters. This harmonisation would help the transport sector, who were those that were the most interested, and also the energy sector in terms of transport and services. And this means that the harmonisation aspect is particularly submission. And in fact, this, we were told, is why harmonisation should take primacy over any other consideration. So this is why the Commission should provide us with a study on the effects of not changing the clocks twice a year while staying harmonised. Okay, it's very difficult to get member states to accept one single harmonised time and not change the clocks twice a year, maintain the time that is best for people's health, security, all those economic and social aspects that I've mentioned. But perhaps that's the challenge we face. Once we've tested all of this, we've had harmonisation for several years, perhaps now we could see how we can avoid a further change, which basically just adds further stress to the stress we already suffer in society. Now let me move back to Spain again, because in this never-ending debate, because we never have sufficient studies, there are certain factors that are important. I mean, the Commission says that it doesn't yet have enough evidence as to the effect of changing the clocks on people's health and how we could improve the situation. Well, I mean, you know, it's pretty incredible to believe that. We've got all kinds of studies now. So at a certain point, you've got to say, well, we've got the evidence now, let's see what we should do. I mean, okay, fine, there might be more evidence we need to get, but we do need to look at the positives and negatives of all of this, and I think the health part is where perhaps another decision which doesn't affect people's health so much would be more appropriate. So, as I was saying, I'm going to go back to Spain now, metaphorically speaking. And I think the situation is relatively complex, actually, because we've got a different time in the Spanish mainland and the Canary Islands, and then we've got the third possibility, i.e. a third time zone. So we'd have one for the Balearic Islands, one for mainland Spain, and one for the Canary Islands. I mean, you know, this is the situation we've reached because of this never-ending debate and because of the fact that we're not getting evidence from the Commission as we are asking. I mean, you're not the person responsible, I think it's Mrs. Bulc actually, but I think that the person should take their responsibilities on board and draw up and provide this study. Whatever kind of study it might be, we could come to agreement with the Council, whatever, but we basically need an agreement which would mean that European citizens don't have to change their clocks twice a year and therefore don't have to suffer the associated effects. We shouldn't be adapting our body clocks to European time. I mean, apart from anything else, it shouldn't be the European Union causing these changes, because these kinds of changes generate feelings of unease among European citizens and it just adds to our unpopularity. So, Commissioner, I would call on the Commission to, as Commissioner Bulc told us last year, a more holistic, a more systematic approach. We shouldn't have a further study yet again on different sectors, etc. We want a systematic approach here. We need to ensure that we have the evidence that we need to take a decision once and for all. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo pani.
Thank you very much, Madam Alaya Sender. You did not take all of your time, so I'm very grateful. Now, on behalf of ECR, Madam Garriga.
Thank you very much, President. I was really amazed that I got to take the floor so soon. Commissioner, I can imagine what you're thinking. Same procedure as every year, James. Although you are actually just being a deputy today, and this is not truly your dossier. But this change from winter to summertime, this is something that it's on the agenda. But it's not just for fun, or that we need to discuss this every year. Rather, we're discussing this once again, this changing of time, because for years and years, despite complaints, nothing has changed. In April and October, we're standing there and we're wondering once again who has changed the clock. And in July last year, I had a question for the Commission. And I asked the question, can the Commission prove that there is an economic advantage to change the time? Some kind of energy savings by introducing Central European time? And does the Commission see the possibility of having arrangements both with our neighbors but also with the international community to change that you could change this and have this uniform system for the entire EU? And do you think it's possible to have a citizens' initiative on this topic? And is this Commission aware of any negative health consequences of the summertime? Commissioner, at that time, what was the response? Do you know? I will tell you. The Commission in 2014 had a study on harmonizing summertime in Europe, as you mentioned before. And, moreover, this study from the Commission led to the conclusion that not having a harmonized summertime would create a lot of disturbance for all the citizens, but also all the enterprises in Europe. Now, considering those arguments, the Commission does not have the intention to revise 2084 or to repeal it. Do you notice something? I was asking about a universal abolition of summertime, and what we got as a response was having different provisions would be a very bad idea. But that's not the question. That was not the original question. It wasn't an option. We need a uniform solution, but it could be simply not changing the time. And concerning the other questions, well, the officials simply ignored them. Economic value, added value, no answer. Better use of energy, no answer. Health risks, no answer. However, there are a large number of studies that have demonstrated that the economic value of making the change is a negative result because it creates costs. There's no advantage in terms of energy. And if you have a mother or a father and ask them how their children are the day after the change, well, they're all wound up. They're having trouble sleeping. They have trouble in school. These are all disadvantages. These are all reasons to be against switching the time. So once again, my request, please answer my questions. Are we going to accept reality and simply abolish this time switching? It's time to do so. No one is going to miss this. Also, those persons who are not present today. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Augurator Garike. On behalf of ALDE Group, Deputy Gesine Meissner, 4 minutes, please.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, it's not your fault. We know that you are not the competent Commissioner, but the question is to the Commission. We hope you'll report back and certainly tell the relevant Commissioner, Mrs. Bulc, what the situation is here and what the mood is here. There are not many of us here, perhaps, but we're all of one mind. And what we want is to articulate the views of most Europeans who do not want to have to change the clocks. In Germany, 73% of people, of respondents, said they didn't want to change their clocks. And that's a very whopping majority. The Parliament has taken initiatives. We've had hearings with different committees where we've taken up a position. As Arne Gericke said, there's also the study going back to 2014. There you only looked at the question, would the Member States agree if changing the clocks was abolished without agreeing what the new uniform time would be. But what we want is a solution for Europe, either summer or winter time. We can argue and we can agree on that, but provided that everyone had the same time on their clocks. Now, there were reasons way back in 1980: energy savings. We wanted to reduce the number of injuries on the roads. We've been told that virtually no energy is saved. We know that given the margins, it could be 1% less, 1% more, but the bottom line, hardly anything at all. And now basically what has happened is that the accidents, if they're not taking place in the evening, are occurring in the morning hours instead. Many people complain, as has been said, especially elderly people and children, but other age groups as well. Difficulties they have, circulatory ones, disturbed sleep, heart problems. 12% get depression, get depressed, get the blues. People are sick as a direct result. And of course, taking more medicine causes problems as well. In the German construction, the building trade, that causes problems. 30 million euros lost in turnover because of the changeover. On the railways, problem, milk production per cow goes down, surprise, surprise. And the Bundestag has commissioned its own study which found that the conditions since the change have actually changed themselves. The way people work has changed. The energy sector has changed in fundamental ways. Leisure activities have evolved as well, and we've got to keep up to date and have a harmonised approach to this across Europe. And I think that every 6 months having to change the clocks, none of us want that now. It should be a thing of the past. It's no longer necessary, and indeed it's detrimental to people. Please pass that on to Mrs. Bulc and all your colleagues in the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. You talked about the small number of MEPs, precisely speaking 14. On behalf of NGL Group, Javier Benito Zuluaga. 3 minutes, take a floor, please.
Buenas tardes y muchas.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, President. We're talking about changing the clocks twice a year, and this is a custom that was established by a European directive back in 1981, as has been recalled just recently by the Spanish Parliament to the Balearic Islands, who voted this week to maintain the clocks as they are without changing. This change is very curious. Roosevelt referred to it as wartime because it was brought into force during the wars with the objective of saving coal. We, I think, believe that this is not actually a major event, because this change of the clocks is basically being done with one goal, which is to save energy efficiency. But we have a directive on energy efficiency which we revised recently, and it almost included binding targets for countries. In addition, member states' governments don't actually make major efforts to apply these measures which relate to energy efficiency, which is at the end of the day what the point is. And this really should be a key issue for economic reasons and also to prevent climate change. Okay, well, we need to reflect on this. Does this measure, changing the clocks, save energy? I mean, this argument was actually more valid when we had old-style heavy industry, but the truth is now that energy-intensive sectors now work 24 hours a day, so you can't actually you can't actually tell they're making savings at all. Let me recall that this directive goes back to 1981. Once again, the reality now is that the scientific community is split on the savings that are being produced by this measure. It might be 5%. It might be a mere 1%. Some studies even say that these savings may well be produced just in the first days following the change in the clocks, but then actually return to similar levels of consumption prior to the clocks changing after a few days. Let's look at the reality for our citizens. The fact is that the energy that's being saved in the mornings may well be being used in the afternoons. And that's important as well, because we're ensuring that there's less light available when people have time available for leisure. I think this measure should be looked at in the light of having more consistent and better time frames so that people can finish their work while it's still light and enjoy some light at the end of the day. Okay, yes, you've got 50 million people who are struggling with energy poverty in Europe, and that's something that is not being discussed here. According to the WHO, households that can't afford heating are more likely to get ill, to die early, and even to have a fire in their house. These are the kinds of things that we should be discussing in this House. I don't think we should waste our time here. There are many people who don't have access to light, and there are many ways of boosting energy saving, and these aren't discussed or implemented in member states. So we should get on to the real issues. Thank you.
Señor Diputado Benito Ziluaga, on behalf of Greens, Deputy Indrek Tarand, 5 minutes, take a floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope to be briefer than 5 minutes. Mr. Commissioner, there's actually no need to amend the colleagues who have been speaking earlier. They have provided all the scientific evidence and facts. And if it were for this Parliament to decide, even though we are not very large in numbers tonight, we are representing a much bigger group of MEPs. So if it were Parliament to take a decision, you would come back in spring without switching your clock. That's what I say. The problem is that the Commission and the Council seem to live in a different continent, not on the continent who has given mankind great minds like Galileo or Copernicus, even though ironically we have European programs on budget lines which are named after those guys, but we in Commission and in Council we seem not to have understood their teaching, which is basically that the Earth goes around the sun, not vice versa. And man is not God, who can create more light by just tickling their watches. More light is impossible to be created. You said, Mr. Commissioner, that the EU introduced this measure as a response to the 1970s energy crisis. Yes, indeed, you are right. But actually the measure was introduced as a part of wartime economics, as was pointed out by a previous speaker, by German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russian Tsarist Empire and Ottoman Empire. Where are these empires today? Not to be found, because they were wrong. Who introduced it again? Two fellows, also famous in European history, Mr. Hitler and Mr. Stalin, because they also dreamed about how to have war on the continent. The first thing Hitler did in Belgium in 1940, he tore down the tricolour, put up the red banner and switched the clock. The same happened a month later in Estonia, but it was made by Stalin. So, in my opinion, the European Union is not in war. Yeah, indeed, we have tremendously important crises which we have to deal with, but internally we are not in war. So it is the last time to stop the wartime economic measure, and you were right pointing out that harmonised and coordinated management of time zones is very relevant from an internal market point of view, from many other aspects, transport, etc. But this is what we are telling you. We are not against coordination and harmonisation. We just ask you to stop this toying with the clocks, because, as it was said by Madame Ayala Sender, it's harmful for children, it's harmful for elderly, it brings us traffic accidents, it's harmful for animals, be them pets or be them farmed, because then again these guys who want to change time twice a year, they just destroy the quality of animal life. And you know, Commissioner, we have many people inside this Parliament who are fighting for animals' rights. So finally, I think there will always be people who deny the basic natures of the laws of nature. And they will believe that if we turn the clock, we get more light, particularly in the evenings. But, you know, Galileo was also sentenced to death because he had discovered how the laws of nature work. And I hope, and I wish you good luck, Commissioner, by going to your colleagues, to the responsible Commissioner, and ask them by spring, because it's 6 months, to come up with a meaningful proposal to stop the stupidity. It's that easy. And if you come with that, we will welcome you. If you don't make a proposal, better tell them not to come. Thank you.
Aitäh. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Tarand, do you accept blue card from Mr. Tarabella? Obviously, yes. Deputy Tarabella.
Je sais, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Tarand, chers collègues.
President, Mr. Tarand, colleagues, I know that in Estonia the sun goes down very late and comes up very early in Estonia, but in most of Europe, when you reach the autumn, there's a bit less sunshine. But Mr. Tarand, you said there was an increased risk of accidents, but don't you think that's because there's more ice on the road in October and November? I mean, perhaps this could be the reason for the accidents rather than the changing of the clocks.
Time for your answer.
Well, Mr. Tarabella, you are normally, as always, right. The ice and snow have impact on the traffic accidents, and that is why normally in France and Belgium, when the winter comes, your drivers will be advised, don't follow Estonian and Finnish drivers because they are used to ice, but you are not. But the light is limited amount. I mean, the norther you go, there's a polar day and polar night, and we cannot change it by switching clocks.
Thank you. On behalf of EFDD Group, Deputy Julia Reid, 2 minutes to floor, please.
Mr. President, we the British are time lords. We invented the time machine. H.G. Wells did that. And we invented Doctor Who used it to travel through all of time and space. So actually, we invented time itself in the form of Greenwich Mean Time, the world standard and a world first. Once we had also invented the railway, we forced time standardisation, and it happened in my constituency. In the 1840s and 1850s, the best railway in the world, the Great Western Railway, engineered by the greatest engineer of his day, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, necessitated that a muddle of time zones be brought into the age of technology. In 1825, the fastest anyone could go was dictated by the speed of a horse, about 20 miles per hour maximum in very short bursts. Railways changed everything, and for the better. This is relevant because as a scientist I know that we need to be practical. What works best to meet the needs of ordinary people in a changing world? The answer is straightforward. Ordinary people want to maximise daylight and do as much as possible during the daylight hours. I want my country to take the lead again. We are, after all, the lords of time. We must determine rationally how we can absolutely maximise the availability of daylight for ordinary people, and then apply it. Thus, once again, the rest of the world can follow our lead into a better, brighter, hopefully a sunnier future, just as they should now over Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you. Teraz Lady Anna Zaborska, 3 minuty, prosím.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioner. It's unbelievable, but exactly a year ago, almost a year ago, here in the chamber of the European Parliament, there was a debate why is it necessary to cancel the winter and summertime shift? After the Commissioner has had his speech, I can see that we didn't get anywhere, even after a year. Let's realize that we are not talking here only about simplifying lives of citizens. We are talking here about health. We are talking about harm on property of human lives that could have been saved. The experts justified that there is a connection between traffic accidents and the time shift, complications during surgeries, and negative consequences in agriculture. It all has been proven. When we have to shift time twice a year, we don't save money by that. Just the opposite. The experts say that the European economics, because of this shift, loses 1 to 2% of its GDP. It represents losses almost 300 billion euros. I'm really surprised, I have to admit, that Commissioner Bulc wrote us a letter, us the deputies, and she said in that letter that it's important to harmonize the winter and summer shifts in all the Europe, across Europe. There is no bone of contention. It's not about individual member states wanting their own time. No one wanted that. It's a nonsense. I'd like to believe that the Commissioner was not quite serious when she wrote that part of her letter. Perhaps it was a light attempt on joking. Perhaps we will learn how to appreciate it in time. Just like the people who talked before me, I welcome that the Commission admits there is a problem in the time shift, and citizens are really bothered by this shift. Maybe the citizens are even bothered by this problem more than by other problems the European Commission tries to resolve. The Commission, in spite of its being so busy, let's hope it will be scheduling some time for reconsidering the arguments for the time shift. Let's hope that the Commission will be responsible enough to take account of the speeches that the Commission has heard in the Chamber. I hope that when we meet again here in a year, we are not going to talk about our requirements, but there will be a text to update the Directive 2000/84. Thank you.
Ďakujem. Monsieur député Marc Tarabella, 1 minute et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais porter une voix ici.
Thank you, President. Can I just say that I defend the change of time, in particular summertime. Why? Because when I was 13, I was in school at Saint-Roch-en-Ferrières in Belgium. After the Easter holidays, 76, that was the first time we had a change to summertime. And we were able to play basketball and football all day long. And I can tell you, at the time we now have floodlights in the evening, which means that they can stay outside longer for physical activity, for sport, and also leisure has become very sedentary. The second advantage is conviviality. It's the best antidepressant rather than reaching for the Valium. You can sit on a café terrasse, it's good for business, and people can chat and share a joke. And that's possible because of the switch to summertime. I don't think the cafe owners will say any different, will tell you any different. And then back to summertime after the winter, as Mrs. Reid said earlier on, that means you can have the benefit of natural daylight. When sun goes down, going back to summertime means you've got a bit more light early on when kids are going to school. And this is why I believe that harmonisation is a good thing, a useful thing for every country. The UK may, very often they go their own way. Greenwich is in the UK, of course. And the Canary Islands, well, 20 degrees west. Clearly they might need a different time zone. But going from one to the other at the same time across the EU is fundamental. So don't change anything. Tell Mr. Timmermans that on this dossier he can just put his feet up and no change. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Deputy Tarabella. Do you accept blue card from your colleague from the same political group, Madame Ayala Sender? Naturellement, je pense. S'il vous plaît.
Gracias, presidente. Sí, solamente quería recordarle.
Yes, Mr. President. Simply to recall, for the benefit of my good friend Mr. Mark Tarabella, that I understand his nostalgia for his salad days, his youth, as we all do, I think, hark back to those days. But I think that the evidence is all pointing in the same direction. Summertime is good, of course, but what's bad is the switchover, is the change. And that's what the universities, a number of scientific studies which have been available to the Parliament last year have clearly indicated to us. And therefore we have to find the best possible time arrangement for people's health and their happiness, their state of mind. So let's try to find times which is good for families, socially, and for workers. That's really what we're after.
Mais oui, mais on pourrait peut-être financer des études.
Well, I'm sure I can commission studies which will come to the opposite conclusion. In terms of capability, getting the benefit of daylight when winter is upon us, I think it's fundamental. When we talk about change, well, when you're in a car and there is 2 hours different, you change your watch. Now the GSM, your mobile, changes by itself. And we're all air travellers, air passengers, and we know that you have going from having an extra hour of sleep and another time of year when you have an hour less. So please, no silliness here.
Bela, sadawi zastupnik Ivan Jakovčić, 2 minuty, molim.
Hvala lijepo, gospodine predsjedniče.
Thank you, Chair. Let me make myself clear at the start. After reviewing various arguments in favor and against, I'm in favor of abolishing the switch. The reasons why this was introduced are no longer valid as they used to be. 100 years ago, when in wartime switch from summer to winter time was introduced, the main reason was to save coal. The way of living was greatly different than it is today, and now we have more and more renewable energy sources, and our daily life has radically changed. We can cool or heat our homes, and we have changed our habits of using transport. So it is obvious that energy savings are no longer a strong argument in favor of the switch. We need to start with one fact, the harm caused to human health from this switch. This is visible in elderly people. It has also been proven that this has an adverse effect on animals. The switch from winter to summertime and vice versa has also caused disturbances in communication, and the interests of people and animals must be priorities. This must be the chief argument in this discussion, and also the chief argument in favor of abolishing this. A study conducted on 1,500 respondents in Croatia showed that most citizens are against this switch and that there is no energy savings. So I call on the Commission and yourself, Mr. Commissioner, to take into account this unanimous mode of thinking in Parliament and to change this directive and abolish this switch from winter to summertime.
Deputy Sean Kelly, 3 minutes, take the floor, please.
3 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I am against this change, and I have been against this change for many years. But until a meeting was organised by Herbert Royal a few weeks ago, and we learned about the damage which can be done to people's health, to our economy and so on, I wasn't really able to say this openly. But now, here today, we have even more information about the damage. In fact, it doesn't do any good, and we should actually put an end to this switch between summer and winter time.
Harmonised approach, and that means that only the Commission can bring about this change. Member States can't do it individually. And all the evidence is there now that this needs to happen. And why do we deny scientific evidence of social jet lag? Many people suffer as a result of the change of time as if they had jet lag. Also, health has been mentioned, accidents, and this supposedly beneficial aspect from the point of view of climate change. No benefits. For me, actually, and it happens next Saturday, autumn will finish next Saturday. Winter will be advanced by an hour. It will come in by a month. It will come in overnight. People will stop going for walks in the afternoon. It's okay for Mr. Tarabella to talk about floodlights. They aren't available to most people. And as well as that, the energy consumption will go up. And then next spring will be postponed by about a month, which has a huge impact in terms of social activity, games, sport, you name it. And I was very interested in what one of our speakers mentioned, that 73% of Germans are against the change. I'd say that reflects the feeling right across Europe. And indeed, if they had the evidence which we have got now here today, I think the figures would actually go up. So why won't the Commission come forward with something that actually matters to citizens, that citizens are in favour of doing, that nobody can do for them, only the Commission, and they will get great praise for it? I think it's a no-brainer, as we say in English. And I'll give you another example. This Saturday, many of the hotels in my constituency will close for the winter. The season is over. Again, the evidence was there that the hotels and the bookings drop by over 7% or more as soon as we switch over. So if there was no changeover, if we had summertime all year round, everybody would benefit. Health-wise, socially, young people and the economy. So at least, Commission, come forward with a proposal. If it fails, but I guarantee you it will be a success and you'll get some praise for so doing.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kelly. And now, Deputy Annie Schreier-Pierik. 4 minutes, take a floor, please.
Voorzitter, dank u wel.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This year, it's 100 years exactly since summertime was introduced for the first time. It was a German idea during the First World War, and it was to do with saving coal at the time. Summertime arrangements have become a European competence, and that's what we're talking about. It was at the time of the Arab oil boycott. It was to save energy. In the interim, it transpires that the energy equation is obsolete. Successive studies have told us that there's little or no energy savings, but there are other things such as disturbed sleep and other things, and that's been demonstrated by many here. Well, everyone knows, I think, what that feels like here in this Parliament. We have got now social jet lag. It means kids have got to get up an hour earlier, and people in homes, old people being looked after, have to be taken, put to bed an hour later. And we haven't talked about the impact on people's family life. It causes all kinds of disruption. The children become unruly, and there are more cases of people going sick. It causes inconvenience in old folks' homes and elsewhere. The machines in factories have got to be recalibrated, have got to be rejigged, and it has an impact on the transport sector as well. It also applies to animals. And not everyone, of course, has got a machine to milk their cows. So that clearly impacts dairy farmers as well. And there are if you're driving in the dark, then clearly that brings an extra danger for drivers and pedestrians. And that's why more and more countries are deciding not to change the time. Russia, Turkey, Japan, they don't do it anymore. They don't change their clocks. I think we can insulate our houses better, put panels up on the roofs if we want to improve the energy situation. And that's why, Commissioner, in conclusion, the time is ripe for us to change the times for the last time in 100 years. It's unnecessary, and let's listen to the critical voices of ordinary citizens. And this, I think, will help to make people like the European Union more. And I'm sure Commissioner Timmermans will be happy if that's the case. We always talk about prevention being better than the cure, and this is exactly one of those areas. Listen to the critical voices here, and we can simply choose for summertime or winter time. And my own preference would be for summertime. Thank you.
Dankjewel. Jetzt Heinz Becker, 2 Minuten, bitte sehr.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. Dear colleagues, our groups across the board have really placing these questions essentially because we really have studied in an active fashion the scientific basis for this. So we have additional questions to our questions. So please, I would like you to pass this information on to the Commissioner. Are you familiar with the research from the University of Munich, where it says they've gathered data from 150,000 persons who have daily jet lag of up to 40 minutes, and this could be young people, children, really a severe impact on the internal clocks of people. Are you familiar with the research from the Australian researcher entitled The Economic Costs of Sleep Disorders? In this study, the economic damages are calculated. This could be up to 1% of the GDP. And in European terms, that is the figure of 150 billion euros every single year. 150 billion euros. And you have statistics from Sweden, the United States, Finland, from 2015, where you have risk of heart attacks increasing up to 50%. If you're not familiar with all these studies, then I'm really questioning your role as a commissioner. And if you're not familiar with this data, if you are familiar with it, however, why haven't you reacted? Why haven't you asked for any genuinely scientific studies? So this is a year after the parliamentary hearing, and you're not living up to your responsibility. You have to decide now.
Vielen Dank, Herr Abgeordneter Becker. I don't see, frankly speaking, Mr. Deputy Andor Deli and next speaker, but the situation, like ask, take the floor, Jiří Pospíšil. 2 minutes, take the floor, please.
Thank you, President. I've been listening very carefully the debate, and I don't have any different arguments to raise. What I would like to say is that I agree with all arguments of people who have spoken before me, all of those who have clearly pointed out how for our human health, how for our internal clock and for our animals, pet animals, it is really complicated changing the clocks. Very often it creates all kinds of nuisances, and in worst cases it is actually responsible for serious illnesses. I've been listening to you, Commissioner, and as far as I understood it, you represent a Commissioner who is in charge of this dossier. However, I don't think that your opening remarks were sufficient. They did not reply to questions raised by MEPs. I believe it would be really helpful if the Commission realises finally that most of our EU citizens, as well as most of MEPs representing those citizens, believe and say clearly that the summertime arrangements should be abolished and that you should raise a proposal, present it in the Parliament and see how we vote and see whether most of us, or see the results, whether there will be people in favour of the abolishment or other people like Mr. Tarabella who are against it. Obviously, we would like the whole Union to have harmonised time, that is clear. However, the question is whether we should change the clock or not. Economic advantages concerning the change of the clock have not been clearly proven. We simply do not have any conclusive evidence. So basically there is no reason at the moment to change the clocks. So please, Commissioner, I can tell you, when my co-citizens are asking about anything recently and the topic doesn't concern the migration crisis, then they are talking about a summertime arrangement. So this is something that they really take very seriously. And if we abolish these arrangements, our citizens will see it as a very tangible and very positive aspect. Thank you.
Děkuji, pane poslanec Pospíšil. Nobody to catch the procedure, something new. Now it's time for our guest, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Minister, Tibor Navracsics, on behalf of the European Commission. Take the floor, please.
Honourable members of the European Parliament, well, as a conclusion, for me it was a very interesting and useful discussion about the time switch. And I can promise you that I've taken note of all of your ideas and views, and I passed them to Commissioner Bulc. However, let me recall you that the Commission hasn't received any official request from Member States on the issue of summertime, wintertime. But of course, the Commission will take into consideration your input in our ongoing analysis, and the Commission is equally committed to keeping you informed once the analysis has been concluded, which should be in the course of next year, 2017. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie komisarzu.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Hereby I close this very important and necessary debate. I do hope that the European Commission is going to reconsider the minutes of the sitting is going to be put forward for our adoption at the beginning of the next session. If there is no objection, the resolution that we adopted today is going to be forwarded to the relevant parties. Thank you very much, the Commissioner. I would like to thank our colleagues from the administration, and the Chairman very kindly thanks the interpreters. Have a safe journey home, and the session is closed.
Thank you.
Il a déjà vidé. Non, on peut enlever tout ça. Non, ça, pas. Ça, il a enlevé. Non, non, non. Comment non?